Let's make a place where the currency is grace and the word is pace. There's many urgencies to face. Process and policy, we're here to solve the riddle, cause freedom and equality need justice in the middle. Yeah, we center justice, yeah, we center justice to give the youth a chance to live with substance. Yeah, here we go, we here to grow, let them know, we center justice, yeah, we center justice. You don't need much to give with abundance. I believe, true indeed, we plant to see, yeah. We center justice, yeah, we center justice to give the youth a chance to live with substance. Yeah, here we go, we here to grow, let them know, we center justice, yeah, we center justice. You don't need much to give with abundance. I believe, true indeed, we plant to see, yeah.
Right, you are listening to our Centering Justice, what do you call it, Ryan, a jingle?
Your theme song.
Our theme song, there you go. Hi, everyone. And that theme song was created by none other than Rod Wallace. Rod is the executive director of Amplify. They're a nonprofit organization serving Washtenaw County artists and culture workers. And they have a lovely fellowship where they pair musicians and performance artists with local nonprofits to engage arts and community. I'm deeply grateful to Rod for creating that theme song and for all of you for joining us today, December 11th, 2024. It is the last episode of Centering Justice for the year. Wow. And for those of you who are here, thank you so much. Centering Justice is a podcast by New. Here we explore pathways, y'all, to justice, to freedom, to joy. I'm Yodit, your host, and this season, I have a partner, y'all, all season long, Ryan Yodit. Say hello to the people, Ryan.
Hello, everybody. It's always good to be here with y'all. And knowing that this is our last episode of the year, I just want to say how great it is to have a community to be able to come together with, to be able to wave at the faces who are, here with us virtually, to know that folks are listening afterwards. It's given me a lot of light. So I'm excited to be here with y'all.
We have another wonderful, at this point, I don't think we can call you a guest, Dr. Mishelle. You've been here enough. You are a favorite of the Centering Justice family. Good morning. Afternoon.
Good morning. I'm also really grateful to be here. I feel like when I think about the time that Centering Justice has existed, it's been a space that I could drop into in moments of overwhelm and confusion and leave feeling more full. Really grateful.
Well, you have definitely filled my heart and my mind over, I think you have been a part of Centering Justice almost since the beginning in 2020. And Dr. Mishelle, this season, all season long, we've been learning about deep democracy, ways we can deepen our relationships with each other, our capacity to hold change and conflict, and to build a democracy for all. And it's been a learning journey. None of us are experts here. All of us are trying to practice new ways of being in relationship with each other, with the world around us, with the living things, including the earth. And we use Centering Justice to amplify the voices, the dreams, and the strategies of doers and change makers who have been and continue to transform what no longer serves us and to build a bridge together towards our collective liberation. So settle in, y'all, find your breath, and remember that this is not a place just to sit and get. It's part of activating our best selves, becoming a part of a movement to help us all get free. So thanks again with us. And I always like to just check in on folks. I will say I'm coming into space today. I just left a conversation with my team, y'all talking about scenario planning for the upcoming year and the change in the administration nationally. We talked about things like how to keep each other safe and folks safe at events that we have. We talked about different scenarios. One of our biggest fears is the Bill HR 9495, which has been tagged the nonprofit kill bill, where it is possible that the Department of Treasury could get unilateral privilege at naming nonprofit organizations terrorist organizations, and not only yanking our 501c3 designations, but also some folks could be at risk of having their dollars seized as well. So my heart's a little that's never like fun. It's important, and as a strategist, like thinking through all of those possibilities feels important to me, and also like the most restorative thing that we can do in this moment. That meeting builds on I'm feeling the loss of our new ancestor, Nikki Giovanni, the poet who passed. So I would say I'm coming into space holding both her power, her influence, her imprint on America and on the world, and also really aware of how much more we need to build on her work and others' work for the future. So how about you, Ryan? How are you coming in?
Ooh, I'm coming in actually very similarly. I just left a meeting and saw that there is like a national publication that just um, put one of my organizations in the crosshairs
Mm,
as, part of the Mount Rushmore of DEI, which is always fun to see, and listing out all the reasons why um, the things that we've devoted our lives to and the communities we've devoted our lives to are seen as incredibly invalid. And it's such a such a disconnect between the way that it looks when I'm out in community, or the way that it looks when, we're doing our work, we're uplifting folks who've been historically underrepresented. And you see that people really are in their feelings about that. To the point where I'm not even sure if our efforts have been as successful as our enemies think that they are. Um, and so I've been also thinking about our newest ancestor, Nikki, and her obsession with and love of space, which is one of the things that I always connected her with a lot of the other women in my life. My mother was a big Star Trek person. And that poem, "We're Going to Mars," is one of the ones that I remember my mother reading to me earlier in life, and really loved being able to go back to it today, and this time where I'm needing to pull on that strength.
mm,
This idea that the future is ours to take is something that I'm walking with in her spirit today.
mm.
Dr. Mishelle, how about you? How are you coming into the space today?
I will say I've definitely needed. I think it's both between, and there's an and to that, between sitting with individuals and talking about what it's like to try to create change and prepare and to strategize in this moment, um, and working with different orgs and groups. I find that there's so much intensity, so much sacred that feels at stake, that it there's a different level of depletion, I think, at the end of a lot of my days right now. At the same time, I have found it to be very I've seen a lot of movies lately. So kind of I think in the moments like this, our poets, our artists mean so much. There's these like little lines that keep coming back to me from like Moana 2 or Wicked, um, that help me feel fuller and more fortified and inspired during these moments. As you knows, I also lean a lot into like cooking and like those kind of like the conversations and the connections that happen around food during this time. So those are fortifying me while at the same time being really aware of just all of intensity.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I wanted you here, are a facilitator of our Racial Justice Fellowship Champions for Change. And y'all had your first gathering of fellows shortly after the November election. And as you were sharing with me some of the way that you and the other facilitators decided to hold that space, and also the way that you are helping folks that are, you know, a multiracial group of folks and folks with many other dimensions of diversity to listen deeply to one another, and doing that in ways that are psychologically safe and honor that our healing happens collectively, right? And so as you were describing the embodied practice that you did with them, I was like, oh, I need you on this episode. Let's get into talking a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what's up on deck today for our audience. Again, thank you y'all for being with us. I see Aaron Smith is in the audience, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Miss Aaron, who is in almost every episode. I don't think I've told you this, but when I look out on the screen and I see you, I always feel like a deep sense of being seen and loved. And today, when I walked into my office, there was a beautiful gift from you. I'm at that age and space in life where I don't get very many gifts anymore. I'm usually the giver of gifts, and just want to say thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for affirming my and my staff's work. And for all those extra, we have at this point a brag board, Miss Aaron, with all your love notes to our staff. So we see you, we appreciate you, we thank you. So as I mentioned, the season, y'all, has been about deep democracy. If you haven't already kind of explored this topic on your own, I really encourage you to. At its core, deep democracy values the wisdom of all of us. It actually is the anti-DEI. Like, it isn't about, oh, let's ask after the fact if we have the right people here. It is actively seeking out those whose voices are shrunken or absent in any facet of our lives. And it pays particular attention to the voices, perspectives, and experiences of those being pushed to the margins. I'm applying this a lot in our culture, even at New, when I think about who gets to be involved in conversations and whose voices we need to hear. And not only are we hearing those voices, responding to what folks who've been pushed to the margins are saying, but that we're applying that in our decision making and in our approach. And so this is little d democracy. This is the relationships that we have with each other. And if nothing else, this season in the country, I think, has revealed the unfortunate impacts of, you know, algorithms on social media that separate us and divide us. It exacerbates the racial and economic segregation that shows up in housing, in what our communities look like. It's been a while since I've fact checked this stat, but I think for most people, being at work is the time when they experience the most diversity. Otherwise, by and large, most of us are going back to pretty homogenous communities, whether that's race or class or other forms of identity. So the importance of listening is not about, say, like, it's about connection. That's what I want to say. It's not just like, I hear the words you're saying, or, I choose not to hear them. It is about connecting. And you don't see listening come up a lot in political philosophy, but it's such a critical piece. And I think those of us who watched what played out closely, I would say that the Democratic Party was not hearing and listening to its constituents, and that showed up in the election outcome. The other thing that is frequently happening in the political domain is that speech dominates public debate. And it's often very individualistic. Pick me, don't pick the other guy. Or, this guy is terrible. And so, you should go after me. It's self-centered, and it focuses on the individual or the party's logic and narrative. But deep listening is inherently other regarding. So it's asking us to step outside of ourselves and our own agendas to focus on others and to create space. So as you're listening today, I want you all to be thinking about who are we inherently thinking about and regarding in our actions and in our steps, the steps that we take. The shift away from our own ideologies, our own demands, et cetera, are vital for some of the big challenges that we have, everything from, the rise of extremism to the climate crisis. We need to build a bigger movement and a bigger tent, and it is going to require us to expand outside of our comfort zones and our common collections of people and groups. What makes deep listening essential is that it allows us to reimagine participation as a collective act of liberation. And I think, liberation and transformation and even words like power have kind of gotten co-opted, and everybody's talking about them to the point where I don't think anybody really understands what they need anymore. In this context, what I am proposing is that in a country that is majority white, in a country that has class elitism such that we really don't have a middle class. We have a 10% and we have a 90%. And we are going to have to build power across that 90% with folks we may not typically be with. And we're going to have to get clear about our values. We're going to have to get clear when we talk about liberation that we are centering those who've been othered and disconnected, remembering that, which I think is a failure of DEI work, that each of our liberation is tied up in with the other. This isn't performing, it's not putting on, it's not box checking. It really is thinking deeply about who are our people and how are we going to build power with them. And it's paying attention to the emotions, the assumptions we have, and the unspoken concerns. We can do that by creating safety, which means we foster space for people to speak authentically and without judgment or fear of reprisal. It does mean that we have to see, and this is not the case in America today, the intrinsic value of every human on the planet. And that although we may not agree, that we commit to principled struggle. It really can transform the way we experience each other and help us to more deeply understand the impacts of white supremacy in this country and on all of our psyches. So finally, embracing deep democracy, which includes listening, can really be transformative when we center impacted voices, when we expand our participation in democracy beyond voting. And as this season unfurls, we're going to be talking about all of the ways that we need to be acting beyond the ballot box. This includes organizing and building community and holding power accountable. So getting clear on, are we builders? Are we breakers? We have to build grassroots organizing, mutual aid networks. If y'all listened in last episode, we spent some time documenting who are our caretakers in community, where are those resources we can go to and count on, and we're going to keep building on that. Remember that after every episode, if you registered, we send out that resource list, and we'll do that again and keep doing that as we build upon what we created last month. And then another really important part, mutual aid, community leadership, really building our capacity around political education and understanding what needs to happen, and thinking about ways that we can get more folks involved in decision making, again, at the individual level, at the institutional level. So today, Ryan, Mishelle, and I are going to get into this topic more deeply, specifically around listening, because it's hard, y'all. It's hard to listen right now, and it's noisy, and our nervous systems are overwhelmed, and our minds have been swirling. I would say I feel the presence of like all of the phases of grief happening, and sometimes it feels like they're happening all at once. And so we're going to keep coming back here and to other spaces and community that, as you said, Mishelle, fortify us. So thank you for offering that. All right. So every episode of Centering Justice, we're asking the question. This comes back from the roots of Centering Justice when our grounding question was what must and will transform as a result of what we're learning. So we ask every guest, when did you know you were transforming? And today I'm thinking about that, Mishelle, in the context of listening in times of difficult times, of times that are conflictual. What's been transforming in you? And then a follow-up to that, how can this deep listening support us in this moment and in the moments ahead?
So the story for me that came to mind first when I thought about how did I know that I was transforming, I in my work have been teaching mindfulness body strategies in all honesty probably a lot longer than I've been really using them myself. A lot of times I'm like, okay, I've got to do and get things done, and haven't always had enough faith in what that pause would do, how would it be beneficial. So one of the times where I not only saw that it was working, but how important it was that, so I have two boys, and we had come home, we were out late, we had got dinner, and the two of them got into a disagreement. And so one of them had a bowl of queso and threw it across the room at the refrigerator. And most people, like, I tend to be pretty quiet, understated. But the way in which, like, in fractions of seconds, I was up and moving across the room towards him. He was already done. Like he threw it and left the room. And I had so much without really even having to think story that came up in my mind about how unacceptable this was, how this was about disrespect, how this was so many different things. And as I'm moving across the room, all of a sudden it just comes to me that like I'm dysregulated. I am in no position to effectively help anybody be regulated. And so I go sit down and I'm seething, like just seething, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to breathe. And the short version of the story, within not too many minutes, he actually comes back down. Um, he apologizes, asks to clean. It's already being cleaned up. And I mean, I can hardly look at him. I'm so angry about what has happened. But I sit there and just keep breathing. Basically, what happens a little bit later, dinner's over. He's sitting on the couch, and I'm like, okay, I'm grounded enough. And so I go to talk to him about like, okay, let's get ready for bed. And he says like, I feel like I ruined the day. I'm grounded enough to try to find like helpful things to say, and I was like, it wasn't great, but things are not ruined. How about we just start fresh tomorrow? And I said, everybody still loves you. Let's just start fresh tomorrow. And he was like, not everybody loves me. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, I don't love me. And I was like, tell me more about that. And basically we get into this whole conversation where he opens up and something really transformative is able to occur. But that took me pausing, slowing down. Like it took me, when I listened to him, I could hear his narrative. It wasn't about disrespecting me. It had nothing to do with that. It was about him using a little bit of agency and his powerlessness that he felt to do something that would get seen and heard. And I think often as a therapist, as you know, it's really easy to enter into a situation and think I know what it's about and what needs to be done. But had I gone up there that morning, like that evening, and chased after him and let him know what I thought about what happened and what was wrong, I would have completely missed the point. He already felt bad, and he actually needed somebody to be with him and help her. And so I think that moment showed me a couple of things, that the habit of slowing down and noticing where I'm at lets me know better how to intervene. And that if I can do that, something emergent can happen that can be completely different and healing. Like I was just about to reenact the same things that parents I saw grown-ups do with me. I was about to feel like I was going in there and making my big point, when in actuality, there was actually something really, if I could listen, I could help him regulate. We could find this new and emergent thing. We could be closer. And I think that has stayed in me, that number one, if I'm not practicing this stuff all of the time, I'm not going to catch it in the moment. And number two, even when I don't want to do it, like that night I did not want to do it, that has reminded me that there is that connection that you're talking about, that transformation is there if I can just stay grounded and present. And that takes a lot of work. But I think it was one of those moments, so many times we're like parenting and trying to do and teaching skills to other people and doing all of this stuff. And we forget that it's in all of these moments of slowing down, listening, noticing, that really big next thing, that really important thing can happen. And so I think that reminded me of how important it is. And it keeps me curious about, in any moment, like, what am I recreating? Or am I getting still quiet, regulated enough to help us create something?
That last part one more time. It's so good.
I think that it keeps me curious about, in the conversations, in the interactions, am I just recreating harm? Am I just doing the thing that I know to do? Or am I staying present, grounded, regulated enough that me and the other people can create?
Yeah. Ryan, I want to hear from you, but Mishelle, I mean, thank you for the story and this reminder, that agency that we have, even within our, many intersecting identities, mama, Black woman, that you have agency and power to create the experience in that domain, right? That you long for, even as we're healing from our own wounds around, responding to a child that's acting out, or, responding to the external forces. I just really appreciate that. And that listening to yourself, that like, let me slow down for a sec. It's such a good reminder. And I think, like you, a lot of us are practitioners of this work. And I'll use an I statement that sometimes I know up here, and then the activating event happens, and I like regress to 13-year-old Yodit. So thank you. Thank you. Ryan, how are you transforming? And there's kind of like a few questions there. So whatever feels resonant.
No, yeah. And also I really just want to highlight how expansive of an idea it is to know that the people who care for you in your life are going to make room for you to express that. Is something that took a while, I think, for figuring out all the different parts of my identities, figuring out how I wanted to come into the world and try to navigate that, and knowing that there's, folks who are holding that space for you. Having them in your own household is wonderful. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of the fruits of that transformation over time. Um, I think that for me, when I think about what's been transformed, how I know I've been transforming, um, we can go with last week. So Yodit, as one of her many, many hats, took the role as a special curator for the University of Michigan Museum of Art. um, bringing up the Silver Linings exhibit from Spelman College, and hosting a series of um, events really focused on loving Black artists and the Black experience that was really fantastic. And when I first heard about what she was doing with this, I really wanted to support. And I said, I have a list of artists that I want you to include in this thing. And I said, okay, here's this Amon, this incredible stained glass artist. You need to talk to Tiana, this incredible muralist, and everything else. And you said, well, what about you? And something that I am pretty notoriously good for is that I am not someone who will insert myself in those spaces or opportunities. Um, I'm always looking to put people on. That's something I get a lot of joy out of. Um, However, I recognize in the moment that it's very hypocritical to say, you should make sure to raise your hand for these good opportunities. You should make sure to share what you create with the world, but not me, because I don't deserve this opportunity or to be able to be in the same space as some of these other folks. Um, I still always don't feel that way. But the reason I knew I was transforming was because I had the little mental soldier standing guard against the bad thoughts saying, you know what, you really hate being a hypocrite, Ryan. You hate being a hypocrite more than almost anything else in the world. And so if you believe in this enough to promote people to it, you should also believe in it enough to participate. Um, and it was a really wonderful experience. I'm extremely glad that I got to participate. It was really something to be able to share with my people the work that I was doing and see them actually reflect back the feelings that my nature photography artwork really try to inspire, some of the political work hopes to pull. And thinking about, sitting in a room full of artists and feeling like I am among them and not someone watching from the outside was something that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a while. And so I think that it gave me a lot of reassurance about the path that I've been taking. And it's also been something that's been just really powerful. Oh goodness, yes. Yodit has just put up for audio folks, put up on the screen a photo of me and my mustard yellow with Dr. Stephen Ward from the University of Michigan, standing in front of a display of all of the artwork available. It really did something, I think, for my overall confidence to understand that these things are possible, that I can be as unapologetic about my political identities as possible and my artistic identities. Um, and what I noticed that was the moment that helped me think about um, how I enter into a lot of conversations. I often compartmentalize different aspects of myself. There are
Mm,
people in earlier parts of my life who know me um, only as someone musical, because the majority of my interactions with them were around music. Um, or they don't know me as someone who's a volunteer addict, and so they know me from these volunteer spaces, but don't know anything about what I do for leisure. There's folks who, knew about like, oh, well, Ryan really likes to read these books too, and so we connect on these spans. And I heard myself as I'm talking with and interacting with people for the first time, really leaning into all of those things being me at once.
yeah.
Um, and pushing down the feeling of that being an overwhelming thing for people and just letting that dynamism be part of who I actually present to the world rather than something that people
Mhm.
dig into later. Um, and I think that if I can be better at owning all of those parts of myself in more frequent spaces, it gives permission for others to do the same. And so I
Mm,
think that that's something that I'm continuing to hold is that pulling at the weird string of self-love from the opposite direction, rather than something being built out from an internal sense of, or in some ways it's a desire to validate and uplift the people that I care about and the communities I care about, and saying, well, I can't do that without modeling the kind of expansiveness I want for them myself. So I think that's one of the ways that I've been transforming that CJ has also um,
mm,
helped me, build up over, over the past few months.
yeah. Um, I appreciate your humility. And for folks that don't know, Ryan is a remarkable, I call you a birder, but Jess Lita, I don't know if she's here, said you are a wildlife photographer. But what has I benefited from, and I'm glad people, I might have bought all your calendars. I tried to save some for people, but I was all up in that display. Um, but one of the things, Ryan, if I may say about like observe first, like being kind of a fan from afar, is it's meant so much to be able to show my son, you know, that even more opportunities and pathways that he could explore in his creativity than what he might see or feel permission to. So showing him a Black man that is, you know, going out into dang on parks in Dexter and taking pictures of big, beautiful birds. He was awestruck by the piece that that I bought. And that experience with UMA, and I dropped like a blog I did with them for folks that don't know. You do have a little bit more time through January. I'm not sure exactly what date, but to check out the Silver Linings collection, which is Spelman College's HBCU out of Atlanta, their art collection, which they allowed 3 universities to host. And I'm really grateful for the folks at UMA who, because of my work in community, asked if I could program some events around that collection. So I'll maybe follow your lead in terms of where I'm transforming. And I want to maybe talk about some of the ways my political organizing has changed to and are transforming. And two things. One is my faith is very important to me, and yet some early on in organizing, and even some a bit now, there isn't always room for that. In fact, there's a lot of sort of rejection of faith and religion, right, is largely what people are rejecting because of the ways it's harmed them. But I think the listening to, you know, the reading through like the artist descriptions of their pieces in the Silver Linings collection, and the way that feel like the 3 of us on this podcast are miracles, you know, and miracles don't occur without faith. So I've been listening more to our, you know, elders and ancestors in the movement who prayed, who sang songs, who relied heavily on their faith. And the other thing that the current moment is transforming for me is a reclamation of radical love, which is also an important part of my faith. And it's really challenging for me to think about loving people who voted against my best interest or the best interest of communities. And I keep coming back to John Powell's quote that at the center of any significant movement, and that doesn't just mean movements for progressive change, it does also mean movements to preserve and protect whiteness, there still are these 2 fundamental questions that all of us have. Do you see me? And do I matter? And mainstream media will make the election outcomes so much broader. They'll make such broad and sweeping statements about why and what the election outcomes mean. But I have found coming back to that statement from Powell that folks want to be seen and they want to know that they matter affects all of us, regardless of the constructed identities that we have. That and the preservation of white supremacy is also an act of do you see me and do I matter, right? As the state of the country and the identities of the country change. So that's what's transforming for me is holding fast to those 2 core principles, love and faith, as I move through a particularly, you know, challenging time, and as is the case for others. I asked some of these questions to our guests, y'all, and John shared, I've had to learn to listen with empathy outside of my mind and experience. It helps me to hear the full story of another's experience and to find how they came to their experience. To be transparent, it takes me days and sometimes many conversations to do this well. And I've been working on setting aside the feeling that my experience is unique. Separate from my uniqueness as an individual, the thought of, quote, but this doesn't apply to my situation because end quote, can trip me up in building bridges with other people and ideas. And one other person, Patricia, truly listening is the only way forward that I can see toward healing. Even listening to people I deeply disagree with, certainly with accountability, and also with stillness, holding space that is not filled with my own stories of what is happening. That was really powerful, y'all. Thank you. So I want to transition now a little bit to, coming back to the current challenges. So if the problem or opportunity, depending on the way you want to frame it, is that the challenges we face in building a democracy for all in the US today include everything from, polarization, which I spoke to, voter suppression, the erosion even of democratic norms. I mean, I'm still trying to understand what Elon Musk's role in all of this is. And the deeper I go, the more I'm like, this dude bought the election. But the stakes are really high for a conversation around listening, and the threats feel increasingly bigger as authoritarianism and other extremism is for sure on the rise. So Ryan, I'm curious about just like high level, what feel like some of the most urgent threats to democracy? And then why is it so critical for us to think about democracy as a collective and inclusive process that extends beyond, voting, right?
No, yeah. I think that, close to my heart is the queer and trans community right now is really going through it. Faced with the ignorance of the Supreme Court justices as they talked about regulating things that they know nothing about was like deeply hurtful in a way that's like just really hard to describe. And just this awareness that you're walking around in a world where so many other people in your sphere are not even aware of what these things are happening because there's so many fires and things, but one that feels truly existential for folks. Like suicide hotlines are seeing increased calls. Lots of people are doing things, and I think that one of the lessons that I have been trying to apply as I think through this is that we talked in one of these episodes about the disability community's concept of nothing about us without us, um, and knowing that this was the first time that an openly out trans a lawyer argued before the Supreme Court, and it was just heartbreaking seeing the lack of care or compassion, the lack of understanding going on there. There was a statistic that I saw, and hopefully I'll find it and throw it in the notes, about how Americans often misjudge the size of minority groups, and that impacts how they feel about things. When they ask, so well, how many people do you think are transgender in the United States? They come up with numbers like, oh, well, it's good, like 10 or 15%, because we've been seeing all these culture war things, and this 1.5, I think, is the highest new number that we've seen. Our siblings are really struggling for the ability to continue to define themselves. And I think that all of us should be aware that the ability for the state to define who we are in a way that is contrary to our own truth is one of the most dangerous things that we're facing, and it will be applied to many other people in terms of birthright citizenship, which is something else that's being debated. The categorizations that determine who counts as disabled are things that are going to be challenged. kids with intellectual disabilities are going to be dealing with all sorts of extra nonsense from the new regime. And I think that it's important to recognize that um, in Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, The Message, which I really love and recommend to people, he talks about in the end of that book about how the seeing progress isn't him making that argument. Progress is a Palestinian writer making that argument and getting these same opportunities. In the same way, I've kind of put my commitments towards following news and publications and things that are actually centering or created by queer and trans voices. There's a great website called Assign Media that does a lot of incredible on the ground reporting, and they have a series about we want you still with us because they're writing to keep and maintain the people through this current struggle. So I think that there's when I think about the dangers that we have is that there's this flow towards we've got to figure out what the silver bullet is. Americans love a silver bullet. We love a single solution for a problem. And what we're facing is a whole lot of different things everywhere that need to be addressed by their communities. One of the ways forward is to let people who have the expertise and the stakes, the lived knowledge, the expertise lead, and to say, how can I show up for them in this moment? What are they asking me to do? And so I think that's one of the biggest things is that I think it's easy to get pulled into despair, or they're like, oh, we can't fix this, or they're definitely going to vote this way, so we shouldn't bother defending this territory or these people or this institution. And knowing that every single person still matters, that none of them are disposable, means that you have to do both. You have to both fight for every single one of those individual kids that's
Yeah.
feeling despair after reading that news today, or waking up and seeing that folks in the UK just passed a permanent ban on puberty blockers this
Mhm.
morning, and knowing that
Mhm.
you have to go through your day with that. I have to be there to hold them as well as fighting for this future strategy for 1, 2, 5, 10 years. How do you do all that together? Um,
Mhm.
we can't do it alone, and we have to do it with other people. And we lack collectivity in a lot of the way we approach our politics. So
Yeah,
um, that's the shortest version of that rant I think I can give, and it's still pretty long.
that was super helpful. Anything come up for you there, Dr. Michelle? Or maybe some of your top concerns as a healer and support? And I think you're on mute, just so you know.
Yeah, I think that maybe two pieces, the ways in which information and strategy is kind of itself at our nervous system. And I think that the ways in which during the election cycle, but ongoing, that fear and isolation and misinformation, um, the very things that we might need to actually get accurate information to really see and to hear each other. Even things like just the amount of time we're spending on screen and how that is shrinking our attention span. And so we're taking in tons and tons of sound bites, but not necessarily the type of information that helps us feel, helps us ground, helps us integrate and find new things. And so I think about a lot the role of like in village or our griots are the how important coming together and listening and nuance is going to be, because I think when you're trying to build this umbrella for everybody where the marginalized voices are heard and where there's to hold complexity in the both and simultaneously you have people just saying like let's just keep people afraid and reactive. And so I think that when I think about what it felt like in my nervous system during Trump's last administration, during those first 10 days, executive order, it's just the ability to notice how much there is like a whole strategy around fear and dysregulation, how much there's a strategy around misinformation and sound bites, and that it needs to be counteracted with togetherness, with a commitment to holding the both and to sitting with the difficult things, a commitment to making more spaciousness and time together. I think along with that, there's when I'm looking even at healthcare and insurance and some of the things that are happening, I think we're going to have to be really creative around how we meet each other, as the work ahead is exhausting, and we're going to need each other, and distress is likely to go up. And so how do we create the pauses that we need and the resources for to get our needs met? And so like so many things, I think that we don't already value enough, like rest, pause, togetherness, listening, are going to become so critical to combat the reactivity and the distress created, and the like seductive pull to, like, for example, my nervous system wants to be alone and safe, sometimes refuel, and it can get stuck there. And so how do we help each other continue to engage in the processes that would give us a chance to combat these strategies that are just like.
Yeah. I mean, what's coming up for me there, I'm going to drop another resource. One of my spiritual advisors is a woman named Norma Wong, who just wrote a book, When No Thing Works. So I've dropped a couple of reading resources. I mean, just picking up on the tail that you left, Ryan, around, you know, what is informing our thinking, our politics, who are we listening to? And with what you said, Mishelle, where acute threat of violence, of unsafety, of being under-resourced, I think our natural response, right, biological response, as you mentioned, I'm thinking about my dog had some teeth extractions last week, and his like instinctual response was to get low, right? And he wanted to be really close to the ground and really close to me, right? But he needed to stay there to like work through this acute pain he was feeling, and disassociation with like what he'd known, because he got medicine and all of that, right? And I was just struck by watching his animal response, and how that might be manifesting in each of us. So one of the things that I read recently was around trust. Many of us don't know what or who we can trust anymore. The election for Black women felt like not only can we not trust white women, but we can't trust, Black men, we can't trust Latino men, we can't trust young men, and, climate, right? These horrible earthquakes and, mudslides and fires and what have you, like we can't trust the weather. We joke about it, like how warm it was in November, while also naming that we know it's because of climate change, right? But I think, I'm sort of in awe of tornadoes when they happen in Michigan, or the destruction that's happened in the U.S. South, with climate. Our politicians, we can't trust. So like when trust is eroded, not even those that we support, right? I am not someone who celebrated the murder of the United Healthcare CEO last week, even though I think I understand why some people are, because it symbolizes this like large distrust we've had with healthcare and with insurance, et cetera. And so when we kind of don't know who or what we can rely on, I mean, even Black folks, at least in my circles, who are finding distrust in other Black people, right? Like, we're all skin folk and kinfolk kind of dynamic, right? So when that trust is exacerbated and our nervous systems are shaken by that, and we're getting, as you said, Dr. Mishelle, all this input from social media that's impacting our attention spans, our making it more difficult to drop into our bodies, right? To, people are like, I can't meditate. I can't even pay attention for a second, right? I can't breathe. I'm having trouble just breathing through, the chaos of the day. I think you know this better than me, but my experience is when all of those things are happening, it's kind of like tornado of assaults on our humanity and on our stabilization, that the instinct is to get low and to get isolated, to go inward, as you mentioned. And what I want to maybe offer in terms of thinking about how are we complying then with a system that wants to disconnect and divide us, that relies on individualism, and that whether we like it or not, many of us are socialized into, right? To taking care of, ourselves and our people's needs. Whoever, and people, I say people, broadly. So what the deep listening potentially can help us with is that we're not using, as Lord would say, the master's tools to build this new house. We have to cultivate and learn practices, strategies, and spiritualities that align to the vision that I know that all of us on this pod listening have for a sustainable future for our communities and our descendants, right? So how do we step out of urgency to tend to the current crisis with wisdom and intention and care? And when our trust has been violated, this is a question, Mishelle, how can we cultivate deep listening when, trust is so hard? Do y'all have some thoughts on how do I tap into that when I don't know who I can trust to listen to? Ryan, you want to get in there? Either of you.
Oh, Dr. Mishelle, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is about me starting small and building out. So there was I think it was in one of the previews, I think it was a preview for Mufasa that's about to come out, where somebody said something along the lines of like we're on the verge of like creating this new world, and so it makes sense that the ground is shaking. I think that sometimes when you understand all of the different white supremacy culture, all of the different things that at stake, the ability to say, to normalize the ground is shaking, and so what it is that feels scary, it feels unsettling, but also what is possible here. How do I find stillness, steadiness in my body? Who are the people that, the one or two people around me in which I do still feel trust? How do I go to those spaces first and feel heard and seen to get that like a collective togetherness? And then how do we continue to build and stretch from there? And to be really deliberate. I often talk about like in our nervous systems, when they kind of like collapse, like when we go into dorsal vagal, like when you're dealing with burnout or depression, that trying to extend really far, let in everybody at that time, it often just overstimulates the nervous system. It's more than it can take. But when we start with something as simple as our breath, start with little bits of movement, little bits of connection, and do the really important nourishing things there, we can continue to build out from there. I think that when we look at I think systems count on us to fracture in certain places where we have unaddressed trauma, unaddressed grief, unaddressed rage. It can be exploited. And so the ability to say, with that interconnectedness, we have all been hurt. And so how do we create these conversations where we do deep listening, where we do deep healing, where we figure out what those building blocks to restoring trust could look like, and practice, I think is where the work is. And I think it's really hard. I've really been loving Temple's book, What It Takes to Heal. And there's this part at the beginning around vision and healing where they talk about how for Harriet Tubman to do the work that she did, she had to believe that there would be white people who would be capable of being conductors long before it existed. And this ability to say, I can feel my fear. I can also ground in my longing and really notice what that feels like in my body and ask the longing what would be that next step, would keep me open to the possibilities, because the fear won't keep me open to any new possibility.
I really love that. And want to just uplift that idea of imagination being really powerful. I think that something that keeps me moving back towards art and creative practice as one of the ways that I show up in community is that um, there needs to be people who can imagine some of these futures in a way that we can get to them. You can't be what you can't see is the thing we're constantly told. Um, but I think that, there are people who imagine a world, vastly different. And that in a world in which we are all interwoven in a way that is more than what we've been able to do. And I think that, talking about starting for that trust from like the smaller to the broader is that finding those examples in your life of people who are showing up for you or people who have shown up and done those things and finding ways to nurture and cultivate each other um, is something that becomes a practice. It becomes something that can be repeated. I historically, as a creative and as an organizer, always wanted to do stuff by myself because I can control myself and I couldn't control other people. I was a kid who always did too much on the group projects. And then when I got grown, I said, I'm not going to do all this work. I'm not going to go join groups for all the stuff later. But it turns out that as I was developing my own political sensibilities, as I was really understanding the kind of world that I wished to see created, um, collectivity was a really big value. And this idea of co-creation, that we create these things together, that we create these worlds together, is something that it took me a while to win myself over to. I think that what eventually happened was that I had to go back and say, okay, yes, the story you're telling yourself about how these things go is different than how it can go. What is the thing that we wish to accomplish? How do we create it, avoiding the kinds of things that troubled you in the past? Um, for other people who are facilitation nerds like me, there's this group of tools called liberating structures that we use to help come up with all more of those funky icebreakers and different ways to approach problems. There's one of them called Triz, which is you look at exactly, what would I do to break this? And saying, oh, like if I wanted to make a really dysfunctional um organization, community organization, what would I do with it? And everybody can fill that list out apparently very fast. You ask a group of activists that and they'll say, oh, well, I know it's not giving people credit when they do something good, or not communicating well, or not being good stewards of money and all these things. And you take all that and you go, okay, well, what if we built something that flipped all of these, or we addressed all of these as part of the design? Um, and you all of a sudden have a list of the things that really pissed everybody off about their previous experience, which validates them and makes them feel seen about how they've shown up in the past for work, but also just acknowledges the fact that we are the architects of the things we create. We have the ability to make something different than what we've built before. Um, and Miriam Kaba said once about how everything worth doing is worth doing with other people. Um, and I would love to be that succinct someday with my particular wisdoms. They're all really long. She gets it nice to the point. And I think about that and I realize that it's actually a big point of pride to be able to say, I built this with someone. Um, and these can be very small things. It can be like my friends and I got together and we were able to figure out a way to handle after school bus pickup in a way that didn't stress out all of our families. For these 6 families, we managed to do something that worked for us and made lives better for our kids. That's something worth celebrating. That is a connection woven. That is something that can be leaned on for something else in the future when it comes time to advocate for a new crossing guard, or to talk to the school about safe pathways, or to, ask people folks to call in with you to city council to complain about streetlights. There are paths innumerable between the small things that we create and the greater things we wish to see in society, because we have to build our paths to them, and we build them by walking. You do it by doing the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, I appreciate that. I want to invite for anyone in our audience, like um, to add if anything you're hearing is rubbing up against something you're feeling or experiencing right now, so that we can also name where those hurdles are. One thing, Ryan, that I think we could do a better job of, and Deepa Iyer from the Building Movement Project, I think has helped us to identify what can be our role in social change. So what you were just describing is a mobilizer, right? Someone who is gonna, get everybody together and all of that. I would say we also had, or a weaver is what Deepa refers to it as. You've got folks who are more um, open to risk, right? We have our frontline responders. In our community, a lot of folks know Trisha Duckworth, right? We can count on Trisha to be on the front line. You've got visionaries and builders and caregivers and healers and disruptors. And I just want to urge all of you that are listening live and that'll come back and listen on YouTube, that we got to get clear about what our roles are, and that fawn and flight feeling that some folks are having, especially after they worked really hard and are so let down by the results. I want you to feel those feelings, and then we got to get back up. And this piece around listening that I want to be maybe even more explicit about. Ryan, you talked about misconceptions around the percentages of trans and non-binary folk, for example, in the country. Well, there only 13% of this country is African American or Black. So if we think, I was having this healthy debate with a friend that's like, I'm like, well, what is your core belief? He's like, Black nationalism. I'm like, oh, okay. Tell me how you gonna do Black nationalism in America, right? And are we then perpetuating the very ideals that this country was built on nationalism and on nation building? And I think what he was really saying is the values of a vibrant, healthy, economically empowered, sustainable, durable community is what he wants. And I want that too. But to your point about Tubman, Mishelle, we are going to have to work alongside folks that are non-Black, folks that are not Indigenous. It is as much my responsibility to visibilize Indigenous histories and our contemporary brothers and sisters in the nation than it is their own, right? And so something I noticed that's different about the first Trump election is I'm in a much bigger echo chamber. So I've been thinking a lot about who else do I need to be talking with, building relationship with, and listening to. And Patricia, you said in your comment, that we have to do that with accountability, right? And we're not trying to hear all the fuckery, but but I am going to have to listen to some folks who it might be their truth, even though I don't agree with it, that their challenges of buying groceries and making rent and what have you were the reason why they thought somebody who lied and told them that he had a better economy than anybody else, or they got more money in their, stock portfolio or what have you, which we know is a bold-faced lie. He inherited Obama's budget and Biden's now, but there are people who didn't know that. They just know that times have been hard for them, and they made what they perceived as the best choice for themselves. This is a big hill for me to cross, but I'm gonna say it out loud because I do think that is going to be vital to build a multiracial coalition that wants a democracy for all. But I want to invite people who are here that might be feeling challenged by that to let us know, centering justice is a place for us to grapple with multiple truths. Mishelle, I'm gonna come back to you. I wondered if you might help us by modeling maybe a practice in deep listening. We've been doing a lot of talking. I feel some things going on in my body. Would love to have you maybe talk us through or walk us through an embodied practice of listening. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm going to do a really short version of something that we've done in Champions for Change before. And could I get you or Ryan to volunteer to just pick some random small problem, like emails, traffic, like just a small problem that you can talk about for like 3 minutes? One of you can be talker, one of you
Only
can be
3 minutes?
listener.
Like only 3 minutes? I can complain all day.
Oh,
Ryan,
But
3 minutes. She said 3 minutes, Ryan.
yes.
Don't
Okay,
be
so
the
small
listener,
problem I
because
can
I can't
complain
handle
about
it.
for about 3 minutes. You know what? This is actually one of those good examples of like, everything feels so large. And so you go like, okay, well, what is a small problem? Accessibility for some of the parks. There's no damn porta potties anymore
okay,
at
so
the
you
parks
got the
bathroom.
problem, but hold on for just a second. So what I'm gonna have, Yodi's gonna be our on-camera listener, but I want everybody to
Yes.
I'm gonna have Ryan talking 3 1-minute segments, and I'm gonna pause him, and he's gonna start. And each time I'm gonna give Yodi and everybody in the audience a different prompt in terms of how to listen. So for this first minute, I want you guys to really think about listening to him as a problem solver. Like you are going to listen, and you're not, Yodit included, is not saying anything to him or asking many questions, just listening, but listening from the um, point of view of, with the goal of solving the problem for him. Okay, so go ahead, Ryan, and talk for a minute, and Yodit, listen from that vantage point.
Yeah. I really want to be able to spend more time in some of the parks, but I can't do so because they don't have any restroom facilities. And I understand that they're like, oh, we don't want to, have more things that can produce trash, or, we want to keep the natural view of this space, but also I can't really enjoy the natural view if I can't go to the bathroom every now and then. And it really changes about, who I feel is welcome and not welcome. Um, it means that I don't get to have the long, stay in the forest all day kind of days that I would like to have to help my regulation. Um, and so I just end up trying to find some other things or limits where I can go or decide to go. And when those change on me, unexpectedly, it completely ruins the outing. So it can be a big friction point.
Okay, so pause. And I want you to notice what that was like, and then kind of shake that off. And Ryan, you're going to continue talking about this same problem, but Yodi and audience, now I want you to listen from the point of an empath. So you want to feel his feelings, you want to be in his shoes to the degree that you can, you want to feel his problem as though you are in his body.
And
So go
one
ahead.
of the things that I've heard from people is going, well, you know, uh, you're a man, you're a mask, you can just go pee in the woods. And first of all, no, I can't, because I am still very visibly black, and very large and very afraid of um, catching a random charge for just trying to relieve myself or doing those things. So I never feel comfortable doing those things in public like other folks sometimes do. I also am aware that that means that just because I can't do it doesn't mean other people, other people are going to be able to do it. It's something that is like a deeply inequitable thing, and it drives me crazy when I'm talking with folks and they're like they just kind of dismiss that need. And I think a lot about how, okay, well, if it's a Saturday and I take some of my specialty medications, that's a day where I can't go to certain places. And that's a kind of thoughts that other people don't have to deal with, but becomes really easily minimized when I go, hey, can we just not get rid of the porta potties at the end of the year? Or I still come to your park things, but watching it get deprioritized time and time again and having to explain the history of why it's important is draining.
Pause just for a second. Okay, so maybe shake that off. And then for the last minute, what I want you to do is to continue to listen, but to just be as present a witness as possible. So I want you to be able to feel your feet on the ground and to breathe and to just be really present and as you witness and listen to Ryan.
And when I have these conversations, and I will run into people who go like, oh, I really love your photos, and I love them, and say, oh, have you been here, and having to explain why I don't have some of these things in certain places or why I favor others. And not seeing that spark of understanding of like, oh, well, this place has made it really inconvenient for me to exist here, is a kind of indicator that they're not going to be considering other kinds of accessibility for me. If I can't get someone to agree to something like a porta potty, there's no chance that they'll have ramps, that will get me to a place rather than harsh steps when my mobility is lower. It's less likely to be able to convince someone to not do wood chips and instead to do like tightly packed gravel, because wheelchairs and rollators work better that way. And so it is a thing that is it's kind of a first level concern, but it's one that I always thought would be legible to people. Everybody needs to go to the bathroom, almost all of us. And if you've got a sea bag, or or just that you have to do something to deal with your bodies, but finding no sympathy for even the basic parts of humanity, because the assumption is that oh well, we live closer to the park, we can just go home, or I don't have to have the same kind of worry is good.
Okay. So what I want both you need to do, but in the chat, share anything that you noticed, what it was like listening in those different ways.
Mhm. I was very much in my head when, and almost ahead of Ryan in trying to think about how to solve the problem that he had. Um, when you asked me to listen with empathy, I felt the despair, um, is what was starting to come up for me, frankly, tied to my first thought, because I couldn't think of a way to solve it. And then, like, when I sat myself in the empathic space, then I was feeling despair, and despair for Ryan, despair for other people, like, oh, this is all bad. I was really starting to devolve. Um, when you asked me to just witness for him, I felt, um, I think I just felt more expansive. And it started when you said, like, feel your feet on the ground, kind of get in the moment. It was as though things slowed down a little bit. And um, I started, like, my thoughts went less around problem solving, or like more narrow to uh, more expansive. And as you were talking about, well, not only how would this affect Ryan, but how might it affect, it got me thinking about how might it affect other people. But I would say generally in the last round, I was less in the busyness of my head, and really working to, in that short time, to kind of come back to the moment. Yeah, that's what came up.
Do you have a sense of which one comes most naturally, which comes easiest for you?
The empath one is, I think, at the center of, I am what they would call like a bleeding heart, and a lot of what, and I've had, if I may, I've had to, even with where I was talking about like scenario planning at the top of the meeting, with our organization, like, I'm having to balance that with organizations that are like more exposed or more likely, to be attacked. And I guess I felt similar when Ryan was talking, and like, what was coming up in the empath listening was my own awarenesses of my privilege, right? And that, like, I gotta pee. And there ain't no porta potty in here. I'm sorry, just a little levity. Yeah.
Ryan, are you going to say something?
No, I was going to say that I also noticed in your face, in your reactions to some of the things we're talking about, that, there's times where you could see in that second space, watching you process,
Mhm.
and go, okay, well, this is what this means for, you know, for other folks and things. And like, that recognition, is something that is, always, much more difficult to get in some of these conversations. And a lot of the frustration I was expressing was about people being stuck in that first mode, that problem solver mode thing, and the problems that they're solving are not the problems that people are always coming to them with. So if I'm coming to you saying that I want a porta potty, they're sitting there going, well, we have a problem with, syringes in the park, and we're afraid that if we have a porta potty, people will use
Mhm.
inside of those, and then we'll have extra things there. So that person's thinking about 80 other things other than the fact that Ryan's got to pee.
Mhm.
Um, and thrilling podcast content. But I think that it's really, telling about, when it's asked to sit with the individual here. It's like, okay, well, no, we're talking about this specific problem. We're disaggregating, you know,
Mhm.
these feelings down to, the actual interaction. And it feels much more willing to bring up some of the things that are more deeply concerning about
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot that we can take away from this, but a big thing is I think we all have go-to places from which we listen. And sometimes we think that's the only way to listen. Each of these different ways of listening probably lends better to different situations. So it's not so much that there's a wrong or a right, but there's a lot of different gears that we have in our body to access when we listen. And a lot of I think it's also useful to think about when there's conflict, where do I shift to in my listening? We live in a culture that really values cognition. And so I think a lot of us enter into these complex conversations in our heads. And that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily allow us to hear from the wisdom of our heart. It doesn't necessarily allow us to hear from our gut. It doesn't necessarily allow us to feel the ground under our feet and to even know when we've gotten way out of alignment.
Mhm.
I think it's a lovely goal sometimes to be able to listen from our wholeness. To not, sometimes what happens is we abandon ourselves and that empath one. And I would say this to a lot of people in this moment in time when there's so much trauma and dysregulation. If you're only listening from that heart space, this is also my go-to. And when I found that third gear, I was like, oh, wow, I think I've been overworking in some of my listening. Like if you're in that empath mode, when somebody else stops breathing, you stop breathing. Whenever somebody else gets tight, you get tight. When there's conflict, you're like in this person's body, in this person's body, in this person's body, it's a lot of wear and tear on your own nervous system.
Mhm.
Whereas if you can sit and be grounded and present and listen, you can see not only that person's pain, but you can also see their possibility. You can feel the distinction. You don't project on them as much. You can feel what's going on in you, what's going on with them in that space in the middle where different things can happen. And so I think that it's one of the invitations is just to notice how you typically listen. That first headspace one will get you ahead of the problem, ahead of what's even happening in the room. And sometimes I think, especially when there's a lot of trauma and dysregulation, that um, empath mode can leave you really open to burnout, really open to vicarious trauma, really blended with the pain, and not so much seeing what else is happening in the room.
Mhm.
And so I think for all of us, that practice of where am I in me? How much capacity do I even have? Like we know once our heart rates get up above a certain level, we don't hear very well. We don't communicate very well. So the invitation to like slow down our communication, to pause,
Mhm.
and to figure out what gears we're using and how we might need to do it differently in different moments. Sometimes like getting people sitting on the floor gets different kinds of conversation than when we're like in the same formats that we've always been using. And so really
Yeah.
letting us like create the spaces and the ways of being that we actually need, and to pause and to even think about how we might need to shift in the moment.
Um, I want to just acknowledge Chase's comment of one of the things he's been grappling with is whether the experiment that is the US is worth continuing and defending. I think that's a question that's on a lot of our minds, Chase. Most of the conversations I'm in assume foundationally that we must continue the national experiment. But part of my imagining is, what if we allow the experiment to fail? What else could emerge? Um, I I think I initially wanted to hold some space for Chase's comment, and I'm mindful of time, and I don't want to rush that. But Chase, if I might offer, what came up for me as I was listening to Mishelle is, and it's more implicit than it was explicit. So I want to bring it forth, which is this way of listening feels like it offers some boundaries, Mishelle, and some awareness. So this isn't a like we have to listen to everybody. This is like who, when we choose to be in dialogue, even with it, with our beloveds, right? That we can notice how are we showing up. It's helping me think about my tendency to want to solve my child's issues. So when I'm listening, or my partner's tendency to want to solve mine, if something comes up. Also, I can get really activated. We're working on a compensation philosophy and like process here at New. And I've spent a lot of time invested in trying to get folks compensated equitably. When I can not be in my head, but be in my body, I can imagine those times when the workplace I was in was harmful. And, it was difficult for me to, and I felt violated by that, and I felt trauma associated with that. And like just being present as people are on their healing journey, right, is very different. So I love that I can apply this framework as some filters, depending on the context, the person, the the need or the aim of the conversation. So that was really, really helpful. And Chase, I just want you to know I see you and I feel you on that big time. Um, big time, especially amid late stage capitalism and what's to come in this country. John said, when listening to Solve, I'm more concerned about justice and how to fix the issue. When listening empathically, I'm listening and feeling frustrated and concerned. When listening with my body, I still found that I felt this frustration, but it felt different to think about how my body was responding. Thank you for that. And thank you, Eileen. I see your comment. Any final 30-second thoughts, y'all, before we begin to round out this episode of Centering Justice?
I'll go because I want to leave Dr. Mishelle for our, for one of our last ones. I every year, I just wanted to share this with folks as we talked about offerings last episode. And an offering that I have that I do every year now, this is the 5th year. I create a giving guide. It's the Ryan's Community Giving Guide. This is a effort that was born out of negative emotions about seeing my alma mater beg for money, even though they're sitting on so much cash. And instead, what I've created is a guide to a number of nonprofits, mutual aid groups, and other organizations doing really valuable work that I love supporting. And I'm going to include that link to share with folks. It's free PDF. But even though we're past Giving Tuesday, the manufactured holiday for nonprofit donor folks, there is still lots of work to be done. And as you're looking to find ways to tap and help people, I would offer that we can use these kind of tools and resources to find people doing work in different areas, like housing or food justice or things, youth programming, all sorts of things that are known issues in our community and people showing up to help.
Yeah.
Gracie Boggs said that the only way to survive is to take care of each other, and that's what I'm leaving today with is I'm trying to take care of each other through everything we do.
Thanks for that, Ryan. And it reminds me to thank those of you who made a donation to keep Centering Justice alive. Last month, we doubled those contributions. Please continue to think about making an investment, whether it's $10 or $1,000. All of it matters. It allows us to keep the show going, to compensate our team and our speaker guest. Mishelle, last thoughts as we wrap up.
I think that I love this space because of the listening in the community, and my hope, I expect that the ground to continue to shake underneath us a lot. And my hope would be that we stay with deep listening within. And when we listen within, like, we find our own internalized stuff and we find the discomfort. And like, if we can stay present to that, and if we can stay connecting with each other, and when we notice, even in our close relationships, and even as we stretch out the discrepancies, the discomfort, um, I think if we can stay listening, grounding in our longing and our imaginings, and keep these conversations happening, keep breathing, that we'll find our way through this.
As we prepare for a season of rest, so the show will go on hiatus until January. We'll be back in January, but this is a season where the land dies. It goes to sleep, right, in order to nourish and prepare for the spring and for growth. I wish rest for you all. I am praying that the energies and forces that work against our humanity lay down, that they die, that they crumble and fall. I will never stop believing that we are who we need. And Ryan and Mishelle, you all have been really important people in my life, not just on the podcast, but in staying grounded, staying connected, and staying whole. So thank you for modeling that. Thanks for being with us today. Those of you who are still on, it's really important that we get your feedback. Jess, our showrunner, shout out to Jess, who's in the background making all the things happen, dropped a link to a survey. This, if you registered, it'll go out. We really I appreciate your feedback, and I want to continue to design this show around the topics and the conversations you want to have. So we wish you well as the season turns and the year turns, and look forward to seeing you. Hopefully, y'all will join us for Centering Justice next week, and new is Hacking Inauguration and MLK Day with our Stay Woke event. Registration is available on our website. We know that woke has been weaponized, but we are reclaiming the awakening that our ancestors called us to in telling us to stay woke. And we are absolutely going to do that from 9 to 3 on January 20th. So be sure to join us. I see a hand up. I'm going to end the show. Thanking you all. And then Leslie McGraw, would love to hear from you, my dear.
Oh, I only wanted to say that that's perfect because the 21st is the National Day of Racial Healing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is. So we are going to honor the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King, but really all of the fighters. We're going to play and rest and talk. And actually, there'll be a live version of Centering Justice with an amazing lineup of speakers as we prepare to enter this new year bold and strong and connected together. We love you and we thank you so much for coming to the show today. Y'all take good care. Jess, you got some music to get us up out of here?
You know, I am so sorry I didn't have any lined up. What do you want to hear?
It's all good. It's all good. We can stop recording and I'll put on